Such love to you, one and all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here on this video. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I hope you enjoy these videos and the others which are around. Have a little browse, and if you like, do subscribe, comment, share. It's always fun to connect with you. But today, in this Monday Mass Awakening, this Mass Consciousness video, let's talk about a really interesting thing that's coming up a lot right now. I mean, depends on when you're watching this, of course, but it's always going to be pertinent because these videos are timeless. But let's talk about the spiritual ego. Let's talk about the spiritual ego. Let's talk about Anubis and his initiation of light. The spiritual ego is an interesting one because it is one that arises when we first, or not when we first, but when we start to discover there is more than just the body. When we start to discover there is spirituality, there is healing, there are things, there are truths beyond the illusion. Spiritual ego arises when we start to discover there are truths beyond the illusion. We start to learn, we start to remember, we start to channel and bring things in. We start to learn healing modalities, learn about topics and listen to certain beings, maybe sharing information on a channel or something like that. And it's funny because the spiritual ego is one of the most subtle ones. I mean, the ego in itself is subtle. That's how it stays alive. It's subtle, it hides, because it's keeping control of the organized chaos that is in the mind, that is in the thought. But the spiritual ego often crops up through projection based on a knowing, perceived knowing, because we may be trained in a certain field. We may be learning something that we feel to be real. We may be in a class or even teaching something. And it's interesting because obviously this same kind of theme can be in any industry. It can be in any major industry that's been here for a few hundred or 1,000 years. It could be in any particular movement. But let's offer some examples because it's important to bring it up, because triggering is happening left, right, and center. Because we're calling our higher self into being, into body. And the higher self and the light, which that is bringing down through us this embodied aspect of light into ourselves, which is going to disperse and dispel the lower frequency that is there, the dead waters of the cells, the old thoughts of the emotions of the old thoughts and the old beliefs. They're wanting to release, to move on. Although they can move on with ease, it's rarely the case, because what happens when a spiritual person gets triggered, they're already hypersensitive, they're already hyper-attuned. And we have this little trick that gets played within the mind of each of us, which we have to keep in check, because we can walk around or interact with one another, offering unsolicited observations, unsolicited advice. And it's interesting because when it's in the spiritual realm, often there is an observation around, this is the wound that you're experiencing, or there is an entity attached, or there is an energy floating around you. And it's fascinating because everything that we perceive, that we receive, goes through a lens, goes through our lens. It's unique for us. It's created within us. And yes, we can see things. Yes, we can connect with things. And yes, if we have practiced and practicing enough stability, humility, grounded energy, embodying that light, then if we're already in our service role, then we may be able to offer that as our service. But what the spiritual ego tends to do is it tends to offer or bolster our confidence through belittling and tearing down of others, of not recognizing when we've been triggered and not recognizing a triggered response because the actual embodiment of the practices hasn't occurred. Too much talk and too much theory, not enough embodying, not enough practice. And while we're in this time where there is a lot of triggers, the best of us will get triggered too. But if we can recognize, like we've previously said, that all triggers will bring up the emotions, the emotional process, which is not who a being is. It's not who a friend or a family member is or a stranger. The emotional process is not you. Let's not identify one another with an emotional expression, whether it's words or actions or thoughts or anything like that. But it's interesting because we can, in the spiritual world, find ourselves getting upon our high horse and feeling holier than thou, but in denial of such because it's hidden, because that's what the ego does. So we get triggered and we don't realize it, and we shut down or we cut off, or we project, which is often what happens. We project and we deny. That's usually the major thing that happens. The most common thing that happens. We deny what we're feeling, we project it onto the other. It's like a minor form of gaslighting without even realizing. It doesn't mean to happen. It doesn't mean to occur. No one means for that to be the case. But it's a protection mechanism. It's a wound wishing to come forward to heal. But the reason why I'm doing this video, it's important to keep it real. It's important to keep it real and to be real and to be vulnerable and to share in this space with you. Because otherwise, if we're not real, how can we encourage others to be real and to be in the heart and to share? To share whatever we're feeling. It's interesting because oftentimes when we start to get into a place of sharing what we feel, we haven't even checked, we've not done the due diligence of checking if the other person can receive, if there is a space that can be created, because what we want to do is we want to learn how to self-regulate, our nervous system, our emotions, our mind, so that if you're conversing with another, someone is at least balanced and grounded, and the other, someone is at least balanced and grounded and ready to hold the space. You've asked them, can you receive this? I need to process. That often doesn't happen. It's often just an explosion, an eruption of emotion and false belief. And false belief seems so real. But it's interesting when often it can project, it can expand. And it's all through the egoic side of us that does that. Because the subconscious creates the majority of our reality, and the subconscious is where the wounds they hide, where we triangulate against ourselves, where we tear ourselves down and create from a wounded place. So the spiritual ego often comes along with that phrase. They think they're so holier than thou. They know it all. Those bits of energy, but it's so interesting because usually it's only the ego that thinks that, not the heart-centered being. So if we find ourselves looking upon another with distaste or disgrace, judging or blocking or silencing or even speaking of another rather than our own feelings, we know that this is an ego feeling victim, spiritual ego coming up, feeling less than. Whenever we're healing something, many of us feel like we need to name and shame, and even if we're doing it in a safe space, but that doesn't do anything other than telepathically send that to someone their way, and if they're psychically attuned, they're going to receive that too, and that's a challenging initiation for many. But most of us often can perceive that is happening when actually it's not, because our own shadows are still floating around because we're not simply feeling, simply being. So this perhaps could be a call to action, or it could just be a heart bow. Say that I see you and I feel you, and it's okay if we feel wounded and triggered. It's okay if things come up in this space, because there doesn't have to be negative consequence with emotional expression. There doesn't have to be finite, volatile endings through that creation. But when we express emotion, when we allow it to alchemize, because emotion will do that itself, it will alchemize the trauma if we let it express healthily. Keep it to the I am, I feel like I am. Keep it to what you feel. Of course, you don't have to affirm I am statements that are not real, but sometimes if you are needing to share emotion to alchemize it, it often is more productive, quicker resolving, brings it more to heart, more complete. If we leave out the characters of the story, because the characters of the story will have a completely different experience, because whatever the triggered party feels will be whatever they were able to receive, whatever is that ego was using. And I know that anyone watching this will have felt exactly what I mean, will feel like they've experienced that. And yet, ironically, the other person that they will have experienced that with would have felt the exact same, because that's how it works. Spirituality brings a certain humility and a certain grace. And that's the knowing of embodiment. That's the knowing that we've alchemized and integrated. Anubis has been present for such a long time through this Cancer season, the initiates, the god of the underworld he is called, who weighs the hearts, who guards the souls. But the darkness in the night holds more light than any of the light that we see. It is a container, often projected upon fears, projected upon bringers of light or guardians of night. And Anubis, like Yeshua like Horus, child of light, their lifetimes were no walk in the park. They were no walk in the park. Those lifetimes, they experienced it all. They experienced the extremes of humanity in order to open the heart. So if you feel like you're experiencing the extremes of humanity these past few weeks, these epic shadows occurring, projecting, creating, big initiations, moving through, everyone's experiencing them in some unique way to them, whatever they need. But it's interesting because they are all to help us open our hearts to deeper compassion, forgiveness, and love, to see that human beings, they're not their emotions, nor their expressions when they're triggered, nor their beliefs when they're triggered. And sometimes we have to breathe deep into our hearts when hearing untruths about ourselves shared. When we're observing friends or family or people that we know seemingly have expressions that come from out of the blue, because we're being taught about compassion, because we project that too. Yes, we project the compassion, but we also project the experience. We create it because there is a part of us that hasn't mastered it yet. And Anubis is guiding us with a beaming light. And he's sitting by us, standing with us through the darkest of nights. So open your hearts and open with the breath of life, the breath of light. May it inspire, may it pull and bring together a higher form of community and love, so that you may experience on earth below what the divine is experiencing above. You are love, you are living love, you are eternal light. The emotions will move through, they will process, and they will clear. Just let it occur. Whatever is going on for you will pass. And life will always increase and get better. Even if you're at the highest high right now or the lowest low, it will get better. You've already written it so. You are the storyteller, do not forget. So if we feel like someone is in their spiritual ego, Offer them grace, compassion, and love. Because on some level, we'll have been there too, whether in that moment or in a different space or a different time. And if we don't feel that way, that's probably the ego hiding itself and projecting the blame.